Hello. My name is Shane Brody. I am a transsexual man. Some people say transgender. I tend to say transsexual because I'm an older trans person. It's generational. I'm traveling around the country. I'm currently in New England, and I'm in the great state of New Hampshire, which is beautiful and forested and interesting, and it's a lot less expensive than the rest of New England, and I'm very excited about that. I was just in Boston, which was really expensive. So anyway, I'm here, and I am traveling around, and I'm interviewing trans people about their identities, their process, their what they're doing in their lives, activism, their political beliefs, religious beliefs, etc. Or maybe if they don't have religious beliefs, whatever. Some people are also very apolitical. Anyway, so I'm here today, and here's my guest, and she's going to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jordan Willow Evans. I'm honestly from Massachusetts, and we're in New Hampshire right now, but I'm in the process of relocating. So I guess pretty soon I'll be able to say I'm Jordan Willow Evans from New Hampshire, which is going to be like a really big change for me.
Yeah. Did you grow up in Massachusetts?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Massachusetts has always been my home.
Like so, what area?
Central Mass, which is definitely like a more...
Like Worcester?
Yeah, actually, yeah. A lot of people don't know where in Central Mass I live. Yeah. So the fact that you know...
A lot of Nordic people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, my
Swedish and Norwegian.
Yeah. My family actually worked at the Norton Salt Company for a while during the time where they were very particular that employees be Swedish. Because I came
interesting.
Yeah, my family came from Sweden. I
didn't even know that. I just threw that out. Yeah.
I've been really big into genealogy lately. Okay. So I've just recently discovered just how recent my family came directly from Sweden. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I've just been trying to learn more about my own family in that regard.
I worked at Harvard Divinity School and also at the anthropology library, and one of my supervisors, her family or some of her family was from Worcester, and they are from the Nordic countries. So that's how I know that connection, and also the manufacturing and the different things that went on there. Yeah.
I mean, I used to...
It was kind of a hub for that.
Oh, it was a huge hub for that. Yeah. We're already jumping into a couple different things.
Yeah,
but, my background, actually, I went to college to teach history. And one of the things that I really...
You mean like high school history?
So that was my goal. Okay. I wanted to do high school history. And eventually it evolved to like a more collegiate level just because there was so much more... leeway you could take your topics, especially for me as someone who's into history.
Specificity.
Exactly. Yeah. So what I found out, because I took a course offered at the time specifically tailored towards the history of Worcester. Okay. And you're right, it was a huge hub. Yeah. Wow. And not only that, but Worcester used to be the #1 exporter of piano strings. It's just a weird fact about it, but I love stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
I love that too. I love the industrial history. Traveling around New England is so good for that because there's so many little towns, little villages, little burgs, and they all have like a little mill or something like that. Some way that they contributed to that. And you can see the history right there on the street. Oh yeah. And sometimes they even have a plaque that describes it. Some of the buildings, though, interestingly, they aren't really refurbished or anything like that. They're in ruin, or they're being used for storage or something like that. I mean, eventually maybe somebody will fix them up, but, whatever. I think it's interesting, though. I was wondering, actually, if this town in particular has that kind of history. Is it a mill town or something
So
like
my
that?
understanding is that where we are right now, it's like, I would say it's like almost closer to the end of Manchester. Okay. But I would say, this area was within that area of just places generally being used for mill
the
purposes.
Merrimack River. Yeah.
I mean, if you go further into Manchester, you can really see, I guess you could say, like the skeleton of how it used to be. Yeah. And that's a really cool sight. I've had a few opportunities.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
I've had a few opportunities to just kind of go out here at night and just kind of look around, and like you can get an idea of how society used to be. Oh yeah. Yeah, back then. Yeah. It's just a really cool vibe.
Well, what's cool too, I mean, you can see this even in very urban Boston, or there's like little tiny roads all of a sudden, and you can tell that those were made for horse and buggy. They weren't for cars or whatever, or just walking trails. I guess that's the advantage of being in a place that's been kind of urban for a long time. You see all the layers of it. Oh yeah. Anyway, so once again, because I kind of interrupted you there, but can you describe like who you are and what you do in the community? That sort
of course.
Yeah.
I guess for a while I was known as the only openly transgender elected Republican.
Okay.
That was kind of an identity I owned for quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
Thankfully, that number has since grown. It's taken so long, but it's no longer. It's just like. Thankfully for Republicans, I'm sure they're probably cheering that it's no longer just me.
Were you part of the log cabin Republicans?
For a while.
Okay.
I did some work with LCR during the earlier days of the Trump administration.
Okay.
I was part of their task force that worked with the Department of Education to come up with a student guidance for trans students.
Really?
Yeah, that was
actually had that?
Yeah.
Was it successful? Did it go through?
No.
Because I can imagine DeVos, liking something like that.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that there's a whole story, and it took me a little while.
Tell me if you can.
Oh my.
If you can.
No, because like
classified.
Oh, it's been so long. I think, and a lot of the people who were involved with LCR are now kind of no longer.
Yeah,
so
I don't think so.
At this point,
why is that? Do you think?
I think
I've seen their public presence, and I understand why, but it seemed to have shifted.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The past few years, I would say that LCR has had a complete shift in its identity. There was a time where it was trying to, I guess you could say, like, court the broader LGBTQ community, act as an organization that was trying to bring LGBTQ representation and approaches to policy to the Republican Party. Yeah, and then over the last few years...
It seemed rather dignified, too. Like,
it tried.
Real policy, like, stances, papers that they would release and letters and stuff like that. But yeah, it's different now.
I would say the big shift right now is that it has gone from an organization that was committed to bringing LGBTQ values to Republicans to bringing Republican values to the LGBTQ community. And that's a huge shift. It alienated, I would say, a number of people who were probably who probably would still identify as conservative or Republican now, but who probably feel so politically unhoused with everything happening.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I brought up their online presence a little bit, but it's really obnoxious.
It is.
And not in a good way, not like ACT UP was obnoxious or whatever, or some activists are obnoxious. I mean, I guess you could call them activists, but it's like anti-trans.
Yeah.
And often like gay and queer too. I mean, they come out with these articles that, they're not even articles, they're just opinion pieces, and they're just crass. I mean, it's the worst. It's among the worst I've ever seen.
And it pains me too, because I really think that the fight for LGBTQ rights and equality, you need to have an approach from all partisan sides.
I absolutely. That's why I'm doing this project.
Yeah. I'm grateful that you are.
Yeah.
It's just LCR was at one point an organization that I think understood that message. And now they're doubling down on their current approach, and they're really hoping that it pays off for them. Yeah. And I'm worried that it won't. And not only will it not pay off, I don't know if they have any recourse to turn that around when hopefully things kind of get back to a more, I guess, accessible point. Yeah. It's just
stable.
That's a good way to put it.
I feel like it's been unstable for a while, and part of that I think was Trump.
Yeah.
Because that's when I noticed that they've really changed. When Trump didn't get reelected, then all of a sudden there was this change. Well, they were like, well, screw it. We're giving up any sort of decorum, and we're just going to attack. And they've been in attack mode. It's too bad, because it would be nice if there was an actual, real, reasonable voice out there talking about economic issues from a more right stance. Lots of things. Yeah.
I mean, it's a fact that our community does not solely exist in the Democratic Party. Yeah. I mean, there are so many of us who are unenrolled voters, who are, I guess other people know that as independent. We call them unenrolled in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. All right. Or undeclared.
Undeclared, yep. Yeah. There are Republicans, Libertarians, and...
You got to be careful about the independent label, though, because some states have independent parties, and sometimes they're very bad. They're really bad. So
Massachusetts did have one of those once, and it only lasted a few years and just kind of phased away.
Yeah.
But no, we're just over and all over. And the thing is when we don't have an organization that kind of captures our values, you're left with an entire quadrant of the electorate just kind of up in the air. Yeah. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
And because of it, I think what you're seeing is a direct contribution to this rise of like people being called groomers and being called any number of like terrible, tasteless things. Yeah. And it's because it's become an easy talking point to just bash our community and have that be synonymous with bashing the left or the Dems or owning the libs.
Right. So. Well, I mean, it's kind of the ultimate wedge issue right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it feeds into other things that have happened, like the abortion debate. Those, I feel like these things are very linked because it's about autonomy and privacy and, you know, access to medical care. A lot of things are happening right now that aren't so great. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of it is coming from the Republicans. I mean, there's no comparison between what the Democrats and the Republicans are doing. I mean, I don't like what the Democrats are doing economically and also with supposed gun control, you know, measures and blah, blah, blah. But what the Republicans are doing is really bad. Right. I mean, it's, you know, taking away people's rights and terrorizing them, I feel like.
Yeah.
You know. So.
I know, like starting off fun now.
There we go. Also, you know, talking about the LCR, there's also the Libertarian Party, right? I don't know if you've ever been involved with them, but there's some right-leaning libertarians, and they often vote Republicans. There's some left-leaning ones. Sometimes they're anarchists. Sometimes they go Democratic. And they have also experienced a change recently where sort of some people describe as an alt-right group kind of took them over, called the Mises Caucus. And so we have a lot of political upheaval, even
absolutely.
You know, even among these smaller PACs and lobbying groups and parties. It kind of, I think, leaves a lot of people homeless.
It does.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that, and I just want to jump back real quick. Yeah. Because since leaving office, I left office in...
Yeah, what was your position, by the way?
So I actually held 3 elected positions concurrently.
Okay. Yeah, and that's how I heard about you, by the way. Because you were one of the few trans people, you know.
I was 300% representation.
Hold on a second. Okay, so I got a little ding on my computer. It was reminding me that I wasn't plugged in, so I had to do that. My dog is here, and I was just trying to move things around and move him around. And okay, so we're back, and what were we about?
Oh, just the offices that I held.
The offices you held. Yeah.
Yeah, offices plural. Yeah. So there was a point in time where I was just a library trustee, which was great. I love libraries. Yeah. Education has always been a passion of mine.
You look like a librarian, you know, with
That's
your
the nicest thing anyone could ever say to me.
Really?
So I was a library trustee for a while, and I was first elected in 2015.
Okay.
The following year in 2016, because I was elected to fill a vacancy, I had to run again. 3-year terms, but I finished 1 year, so I was right back on the ballot. Okay. When I was up for re-election in 2016, I also put in for a freshly open seat of town constable. And I think a lot of people know...
What does that mean?
I was going to say, a lot of people know me...
Is that a New England thing?
Very much so. All right. Absolutely a New England thing.
Are you a town crier? Like you have the bell and everything? I mean...
You know, sometimes it felt that way.
You put people in... Locks, stocks, and barrel, whatever it is.
I mean, if you go back and you look
stocks, that's what it is, stocks.
If you look at Mass General Law, constables, legally speaking, could get away with some pretty outrageous things.
Well, it sounds like you were like the sheriff or something.
Well, that's kind of the role that they filled for the longest time.
All right.
And then when the Massachusetts State Police became more organized and more of a known entity, the role of constable took a back seat and became more of a civic process type thing, or civil process rather. So
like parliamentarian or
kind of okay. I think that's why I said I'm kind of like I was kind of like the town crier because most of my duties at that point were going around to the libraries, the town hall, the post offices, tacking warrants that effectively said like hear ye, hear it be known that we have an election. Okay. So I was kind of like the town crier.
Notice
yeah.
We're getting a liquor license. Or
exactly.
Whatever. Okay.
Except, of course, as constable, you would also occasionally get phone calls where it's like, "Hey, we need you to issue a subpoena, or deliver a subpoena to that person, or a capias."
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
Oh yeah, execute a writ of property from this household, and it's just
that's very dangerous.
Oh, you had to be bonded. You had because there was a real potential.
Were you armed?
So I was never armed. Okay. But there was a lot of debate, and some constables still take this to heart that they should be armed, and some some emulate the actions of the state police. And a few years back, I would say about 2017, there actually was an issue where I believe the state police and 2 Boston constables got into a firefight with each other.
Oh my.
And I believe the constables were killed. So,
whoa.
Yeah, so I mean,
firefighters fighting the constables?
Oh no, police fighting the constables, because some constables take it upon themselves to deliver, I guess you could say, vigilante justice, where they would just arrest people.
Oh,
and it's just like all
a citizen's arrest kind of thing.
But because they were constables, yeah. I mean, I have a badge and everything.
What was the background of those people doing that?
I honestly don't. I have to go back and look. It was in 2017.
Because I can imagine. Yeah. I can imagine what was going on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So I wish I knew, but at that point, that was around the time I tried to get a ballot question, because I was part of a government study committee as well, where they would change constables, at least in my community, from an elected position to an appointed position, because there is a lot.
By the mayor or something?
Yeah, appointed for us. We had a select board headed by a town administrator.
Okay.
And the way it would work is
it would just make the appointment. New England, there's all kinds of different ways that y'all organize.
I could break it down.
I mean, like some places are commonwealths, and like, what does that even mean?
Commonwealth is just state, but fancier. Honestly, like, there's no real difference. But if you ask anyone who lives in one of the 4 commonwealths, they'll be like, no, there's plenty of difference. You don't know what you're talking about.
There's probably some little difference in there, but I have no idea. Anyway,
so
it puts lines on the map.
It does. It does.
It tells you who you can get taxes from. I don't know.
So I was doing constable and library trustee for a while.
Yeah.
And then right before COVID happened, I actually ran 2 races that year, and I'll explain the other one, because the other one was for Republican State Committee, and that was
big news.
That was an entire experience.
That's a big thing.
But the other thing I ran for in that year and was more successful for was school committee, or school board, as a lot of people probably know it better as. And that was.
Were you working as a teacher by then?
I wasn't working as a teacher. I was actually working as a social worker.
Okay.
I pivoted from my education background to social work, because I'm someone who grew up in a family that has always been plugged into social work. Therapists, people who work directly as home care providers, things like that. So, I mean, I grew up with members of the disability community who we did regular respite for, just as part of my everyday life.
Right.
So it was such an easy transition for me to get into, because it was just something I've known since I was a child.
Right.
So I was doing social work at the time.
Would you go around with your parents doing that? Like,
yeah, of course.
I bet the people you visited really enjoyed having you there.
Well, that's the thing. The people that, even when I became a case manager myself as an adult, the people who we provide care for, they're an extension of our family in a way. These are people who you are responsible for making sure that they get resources, that they're living a happy life to the best extent that they can, and you develop relationships.
I used to work as a caregiver, and I really loved it. Unfortunately, they didn't pay me very much, so it was hard to get by. But I worked for Neil Marcus.
Really?
Yeah. Do you know him, actually?
That name sounds so familiar.
He's international. He died recently, but internationally known performance artist and disability activist, going back decades and decades, like early, one of the early ones, and just famous. Like he performed at the Kennedy Center at some point, and he has a play that gets run every once in a while by different theaters. And he's been on TV. He was on ER once. Anyway, it was just really a joy to work for him.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was. I got a lot out of that relationship. He taught me a lot. And I don't mean that in like some kind of smarmy way. Oh, working for a disabled person. I don't mean that. He was just an intellectual, and he had so much heart.
Yes.
He was a person who formed communities around him.
I love that.
Yeah. He was a lovely guy. Anyway.
I'll just say it, because I mean, I could wax on about this, but I love social work. The only thing that made it so hard was I was a social worker right in the middle of COVID.
Oh, no.
I was there. This
sounds like kind of a whirlwind. I mean, you're going from public office to public office, and then working, and then social work. I mean, that's really a lot.
Oh yeah, and the thing about being back to the school board during all of this is that when I first pulled papers to run for school committee, we didn't have a strong grasp of the pandemic yet.
No,
it was still something that was over there.
Yeah, nobody did. We were I was up in Alaska, and it was just like, what is that? I don't know.
So like, I'm just thinking like, all right, this is something that's going to be on the agenda. I'm sure we'll get a plan for it. That's fine. I have my own agenda items of just things I think the town needs to focus on. I'm going to run on that platform. Right. I did, and I won, which was great because it was a district that I grew up in myself and then became a substitute teacher for later on. So it was just nice to get back.
So you were deep in the community.
Oh yeah, deep in the community. Right. So it was fun for me. Like it was enriching, it was fun, it was something I enjoyed. But then really getting into the pandemic, that changed so much of the position. And that ever since 2020, I would say it's been a huge whirlwind.
School boards were making major decisions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for everybody, because when you shut down the schools, when you have all these kind of health mandates and that sort of thing, you're affecting the entire community.
So maybe it's because I like to run for office. I don't know. I ended up holding the 1-year seat. And for our community, it's a regional board, so it's a couple towns.
You're like a political hobo.
For real, though. So like, here I am. I'm inhabiting a 1-year seat. Yeah. So we're a 7-person board with 6 of those 7 seats being a 3-year in rotation, and then 1 seat going to the town with the highest number of pupils in the district, which was my town, Charlton. Okay. So I held the 1-year seat, which meant every year I had to run for re-election. Oh, wow. So when I ran originally,
dude, good job then.
No. Exactly. I'm the one who, if you have an issue, I'm the first on the chopping block. Right. So that first year, 2020, when I was running, we weren't really getting into it quite yet until probably closer to election day, but schools were just starting to shut their doors. We were moving towards remote education. Yeah. The conversation was just all about that and trying to strike that balance between delivering quality education while making sure everyone is safe.
And I'm sure, I mean, I don't know the history of Worcester. This was around Worcester, right?
Yeah, so Charlton, it's about, I would say it's like 15 minutes outside Worcester.
Yeah, I don't know the economics of that area, except that I've driven through a few times, and there's colleges, there's some colleges around, the Assumptionist College and that sort of thing. But it seems like, you compare it to wealthier communities, I would say it's more, middle class, working class. I don't know what the poor community is like there, but I did see, quite a few homeless people there when I did go through. And so communities like that, I think, I wasn't here in the lower 48, but I'm imagining that there was a lot of problems like with connectivity, like getting kids connected, food, because, schools provide a lot of food for kids. And then also, what are parents going to do with healthcare, some healthcare happens at school, but then also childcare. Yeah. We had those issues in Alaska too, and it was super great because some of the failings actually of the government, our local government, local businesses actually took over. They were like feeding kids, our local businesses.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
I mean, we were fortunate to be, or I should say, I was fortunate to live and serve an area that was relatively well off. Yeah. However, we did have problems with connectivity. Yeah. There were families out there who, because when you think of Massachusetts, you tend to think of Boston and Greater Boston. Right. But the truth of the matter is that Central and Western Mass is like its own world. Yeah. And also, geographically, we are a much more rural area. Yeah. So you're seeing a lot of wooded areas, a lot of places where service and connectivity is just absolutely next to
sometimes
nothing.
Even cell service is hard to get.
Oh, that's a huge thing. Yeah. There are whole swaths in my town where the cell phone will just drop out because radio waves just can't get there. Right. So that was something that when I was on that school board that we jumped on right away was we looked at things like food insecurity. We looked at things like actually being able to access the remote education that we're making families go through with. Yeah. So that was...
And informing the families about what's going on too.
That was another big one.
Because schools are often looked at as an authority around those kind of things. Yeah.
I'll say that I learned a lot because I'm not sure if you were aware about me, and I might be spoiling something too soon, but I was the target of a recall effort.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
So
okay.
I can definitely speak a little bit more about that, but it wasn't because of that, actually.
Okay.
That first year, though, 2020, I would say was defined by trying to just keep schools operational and safe.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of parent input, caregiver input, community input from people who were like, well, this is how it should go. This is how we feel about these cohorts. This is how we should introduce kids back into school. And that was the big conversation.
Yeah.
And then I would say about 2021 is when the very start of it is where everything just took a 180.
Okay.
It hit a wall, and then all of a sudden...
Is that when politics came in, or
yes.
a religious bent to things? Or?
I would say that's when people became less concerned about reopening schools. Those emails became emails about, well, we hear talk about critical race theory.
Oh.
And that became the duration of my term.
Oh, my goodness.
Just talks about critical race theory.
Not even COVID anymore. It was critical.
That's the thing. We still had a couple people who were concerned about COVID and who would try and reach out. But I would say by then, their voices were just drowned out by so many people who had thoughts about social issues.
So tell me about that. I mean, I feel like I'm sort of ignorant. How did that actually become even an issue?
So it's interesting. I'm sure.
And what do people consider critical race theory? Because that's academic. That's an academic term.
So I've had a lot of thoughts about this because it was a learning experience for me. And I say that because I made a lot of mistakes as an elected official. I thought because I came from this community. And in public.
It's a hard thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, being public about everything.
And you seem like a very kind-hearted person that, you know, I mean, obviously you're a strong person, but I can tell that you're also like an empathetic kind of person. So I would imagine that would be tough.
I try. And I thought that too. I'm like, when I was going through this, so, and we can talk about this too, but my experiences when I was younger, I came from a far-right background of my own. I was involved with some pretty reactionary groups, and I've had a lot of experiences in life.
When you were younger?
Oh, yeah. When I was a teenager, I found community in there.
Okay.
And that influenced a lot of my early views.
Do you want to say what that was? Or?
Oh, sure.
I mean, you don't have to. I mean, that's really quite personal.
No, it's fine. I think owning it is an important part of my identity now. And I was involved with an organization which is now defunct. It was known as the Liberty Preservation Association.
Okay.
And it was a smattering of former Ron Paul delegates, supporters, and we build ourselves as a home for disgruntled Dennis Kucinich supporters on the Dem side, but
interesting.
I never really saw them. I think it's because Kucinich had favorable words to say about Ron Paul, but that plugged me into a whole world.
That reminds me of kind of the Bernie bro going to Trump guys kind of thing. There's
a lot of that actually. A lot of people who I thought I understood in the liberty movement who pivoted from Ron Paul to Rand Paul directly to Donald Trump.
Interesting.
And never went back.
Wow.
And it's still something I see a lot of today. But so I came from that background, and I thought that gave me the kind of insight I would need to understand the anger that a lot of these parents felt, and at least give me the understanding and knowledge to say, hey, I understand how you feel. I promise it's not the way it looks. It's not how you perceive it. But that just angered them further. And I sometimes wonder if...
Did they think that you were pandering to them or condescending? Or?
They actually wrote me off pretty early. Okay. And I hate to say it, but...
Is that because of being trans?
I do think a lot of it was being trans. Okay. I've heard so many accounts from people who told me, well, this is what they say about you. And of course, they would never say it to the press, but... I've heard definitely. My identity was a huge thing, and I sometimes wonder if maybe if I was on that board and I was mask presenting and identified as a cis guy, would I still have those problems? Would they listen to me more when I tell them, look, your pain is real. I understand what you're saying, but I promise you that it's not how it looks. And that's where I think I made some mistakes, because I kind of took that for granted that they would just understand.
Oh yeah. Well, it's a common mistake to judge other people by your own standards.
Right.
Yeah.
And this was a whole huge thing too. I've actually not really had the chance to talk about this with anyone, so you're kind of getting an exclusive here. It developed into an issue. There was one point where, and it's still something that I kick myself over. Once we got into the full swing of things, or rather before we started getting into the full swing of things, I received an email. I didn't think anything of it. And it was just a question, are you teaching in your schools critical race theory or gender theory.
Was this an initial kind of message that you got about it?
I consider this to be the domino that fell and started the whole thing. Okay. And I had no idea.
Was this from somebody who was kind of known in the community?
No.
Okay.
This was from someone in the community who was known, yes, but I would say they weren't known for this kind of like political discourse.
Do you know what I mean though? Like sometimes activists who are, and they can be right or leftist, they can come to like these small boards and bring an issue and sort of as a way to create controversy for their issue.
I do think that there were some individuals who fed into that mentality. Yeah. I don't think this person was that.
Okay, so it wasn't a plan.
It wasn't a plan.
Were just asking.
I really think they were curious, and I misinterpreted their email because I was my school committee's representative to the district's equity committee, which was a committee created by my school district to study the issue of equity, which was becoming rapidly a buzzword.
Yeah, it is.
And in many ways, it still is today.
Yeah. So they were just trying to, I mean, a lot of so-called equity community, committees that I've seen just try to expand who is listened to or who gets to say something. Yeah. Like gay people, lesbians, people of color, poor people, parents even, so I guess what was your board about?
So our board did a lot of that. Our board, I would say, at the end of the day, was primarily advisory. Okay. Because
that's all it is.
Yeah, everything we did would still have to go in front of the school committee.
Yeah, it was just opinions, basically.
And what makes it frustrating is that while this was happening, we were probably, I would say, about 3/4 of the way done, if not more so, with our meetings. And I still regret not being more present. And this is something that I have been open about on social media. Yeah. I've for the longest time, ever since I was a young teenager, I have had an eating disorder and struggled with it. Okay. And at this time, I was going through treatment. Okay. And say what you will about all the things COVID did, the ability to engage with people remotely really did improve accessibility. And I consider myself fortunate because
telehealth really took off.
I was able to go to treatment because I was there for about 6 months. Yeah. And still be where I need to be for school board meetings. Okay. And be present in the community and do all the things that were expected of me as a public servant.
And it's less of a leap in a way to do telehealth. Yeah. Yeah.
So while this was happening, I was working on myself, of course. So I missed the initial, I guess, discussion where critical race theory became such a buzzword
for this committee, the equity community.
Yeah, I guess even in the broader sense.
Okay, all right.
So for me,
I don't know much about it, frankly. I'm like,
I'll try and summarize.
Yeah, how did this become such an issue?
So when I was asked, like, is this committee looking at critical race theory and gender theory? I went to the academic definition because I'm someone who's a bit of an academic. So I'm thinking like, oh, well, we are looking at it because, well, why wouldn't we? It's a study of how race impacts our institutions and how we perceive them. Sure. So obviously we want to read the books and take it into consideration. Sure. But that's how I always interpreted it. So I said it's at the heart of what we do because, and that was my mistake. I wanted to say... I was trying to say that, yes, we are looking at it. It's something that we're studying because it's relevant to our experience. But because I have a tendency to talk extremely flowy, I sometimes end up shooting myself in the foot.
You just weren't careful enough.
I was not. Words. And it kicked off a series of events which put a lot of pressure on that board, which in turn led to a lot of pressure falling on the broader board, which kind of put the foot in the door for a lot of people who had grievances with the way the administration was handling the district.
Or grievances that had probably nothing to do with the school.
Yeah, it started off with critical race theory, and then it jumped to complaints and issues with the curriculum. It jumped to complaints and issues with parts of the curriculum that were adopted well before I was involved, like a study to do a new CKLA program.
What's that?
Oh God, you know what? I haven't had to think about the
general.
So CKLA, it's a way we look at language and the curriculum and that as well. It was a reading writing language program that an earlier committee, I should say, took on and researched about adopting, and then I happened to be there when the results came in effectively. And people because we were the faces at the table at the time, you know, we were the receivers of a lot of that anger and frustration. So here we are jumping from one topic to one topic, and everything is conveyed in such a way that there is a big conspiracy going on. So a lot of people who...
Because it's at the heart of what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Propagandizing, I guess.
And I said a term that I know a lot of LGBTQ organizations and activists use, which is that we're trying to change hearts and minds. And that was just red flag to them. Like, that was literally taunting the bull with the red flag. Well, I think, and they charged.
But I think that in a lot of ways, the reason why I said there might be other grievances people are trying to work out, because I think people just have a lot of anger that, you know, and if they can focus it somewhere, they're going to do it, you know. There's a lot of abusive, I mean, we see this online too. There's a lot of abusive behavior. Yeah. So it sounds like in some ways it wasn't even about what you guys were doing. It was just people being angry.
There was a lot of that. And I contributed to some of that directly too, because I didn't see it like that right away. I really thought
you didn't
that
back down to probably.
No. And there was one meeting in particular where there was one.
That's what makes you successful in what you do, but probably it's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
There was one meeting in particular. Excuse me. This was a little bit later in the year. I'd say this is about September, October, August, where we had such just an environment, and you can find audio files of this meeting online because it was picked up by WBUR, which is
I know what that is.
So here we are.
The public radio in Boston.
Yes. Yeah. So because they ended up doing an article about, as they put it, the culture war comes to Central Mass, and we were the example. So what ended up happening was the meeting got so out of hand between the members of the board and the audience, and no one could have a communication, and the board couldn't do business, that we adjourned. I'm just like, this is terrible.
So you couldn't do the business of the actual board.
Yeah, so we're just like, you know what?
And that sort of thing.
If this is how it's going to be, we're not going to have this meeting.
Right.
And like...
Oh, I bet that pissed people off too.
Absolutely, because a lot of the people who were on that board with me were people who had held those seats since not only I was in school, but before I was born.
Oh my.
So they had never encountered something like this. Yeah. And they were probably trying to handle the situation from their years of experience with like, well, technically this isn't a public meeting, this is a meeting in public. And people were like, nope. So it got to such a point.
People don't want to listen to legalistic arguments when they're upset.
It got to such a point that I lost my cool, and I started shouting back at the parents. And I'm like, because what happened was, one of the parents on their way out, they had to be escorted off by a police officer. They called our board a bunch of R slurs.
Okay.
And as someone I mentioned earlier, I worked in the social field as a social worker, especially with the disability community. I saw red. Wow. I'm like, you can't say that. Well, I just started shouting from...
You're human as well, you know, and you're new to these roles. I mean, you've done a lot of it so far, but it's kind of a whirlwind. So you're learning as well.
So like, I snapped. Thankfully, my boyfriend who you met earlier,
sweetheart,
he absolute sweetheart. He was in the audience.
My dog loved him.
He was in the audience. He actually played peacekeeper to the best of his ability. He came over and he's like, "You got to relax," and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and he's a big dude too, so yeah.
So
gentle giant.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that came back to haunt me, because that was what prompted a petition to force my resignation. No. And
you were on their radar then.
I mean, that petition cleared like 250 signatures.
I bet you saw your name everywhere.
Oh, I'm like, oh yeah, I was a hot topic.
More so than probably when you were being elected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, they tried to force my resignation. They formed an organization to do so. They sent like correspondence to my school board.
And this is terrible too, because these are your neighbors.
That's the thing.
Because Worcester is not that big.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, I'm thinking like, why don't you just have this conversation with me? We're all a small town. We're a couple small towns.
That's right. You're even in a smaller town.
Like you can find me. Like So what ended up happening was this impeachment. It wasn't an impeachment or a recall effort yet. It was just a make her resign. You're the school board. So my peers on the board were like, well, that's not really. We can't do that. Like, we're a school board. We set policy, we hire and fire staff, and we approve the budget. Like, that's what we do.
Yeah.
So they're like, we can't do that. So that's when the town...
Right, because you're an elected official.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's when the board, or not the board, sorry, but the organization that was trying to rally around this, that's when they're like, all right, we're going to take the legal approach. And they started looking up the bylaws for recall efforts in Massachusetts.
Which is their right to do it.
Absolutely.
Right to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it just led to one thing after another. And after that happened, I was effectively persona non grata. All of their issues, of course, no one was ever going to listen to anything I had to say at that point. And that it just went downhill from there. And it was rough because this is a community that I love.
But yeah, in some ways you just got to keep on trucking though.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've never been in that position before, but I've seen, like, up in Fairbanks, there's a couple, I'm thinking of a couple very liberal school board members. And there were people in the audience who were definitely there to say bad things. And they just kept doing it. They just kept saying what was going to help people. What was actually going to help people. You know.
And so, to kind of get back to an earlier question that you had of, like, what is critical race theory? Here I am thinking initially from the academic aspect of it, but to them, critical race theory is the kind of buzz phrase that you hear a lot from, I would say, right-wing mainstream media right now, where trying to instill guilt and shame into your children because of their race and their upbringing and all of that. And that was never my intention or my understanding of it. That's the definition it has taken in more recent time.
Well, that's the propaganda.
That's the definition that was forced upon it.
Yes, right.
So by that point, though, I mean, I think
it's just I mean, just from the name of it, it seems to me like it would just be a critical look about how we our stories about this country, basically.
Exactly.
Which we need to evaluate all the time. We need to reevaluate all that stuff.
I took critical race theory and I viewed it in the same lens that I view critical thinking and critical philosophy. So to me, I really was just looking at it as through an analytical view.
Right.
Their definition did not resonate with me, and it was not my definition. And I really think that was the start of a series of problems that a lot of districts across the nation are seeing, or that people are going toe-to-toe with each other over the meaning of words, and no one seems to agree on what they mean anymore, and it's causing a huge breakdown.
So we're taking, like, this academic field, which is very important, and it's a big field, actually, and then we're distilling it and twisting it to mean something else to make people upset. That's wrong. That's wrong, folks. You know, I don't care what your political stripe is. That's wrong.
And the kicker is that
and here we have a Republican saying that too.
That's the thing. To my knowledge, to this day, I was the only Republican on that school board.
Oh, wow.
And I was the number one target.
Wow.
And
no wonder WBUR
that's why it was so interesting. It's like they keep going after, like, you know, these leftist infiltrators and what have you, and I'm like, I'm the only Republican. Like, come on. Not only that, I was an officer for the town party. I was the Republican secretary for our local party for years.
You know what? I keep meeting people like you who are just, like, have 10 jobs all at once. And you're just
you don't even know the half of it yet.
You're so humble at the same time. I mean, as I'm talking to you, you're talking about all these extra things you're doing. I'm like, y'all blow me away, you know.
Thank you. Well, it's because I never really had, like, a strong sense of community growing up, and
so you are really involved. You're like,
I became really involved because it gave me something I lacked, and then it just became a part of my identity because it's something I enjoyed doing. So I mean, like, nowadays, this is going to tie in too,
and it's quite intense too. That in
very,
you know, Central Mass, which is I'm assuming the more conservative part of the state, that they elected you to be on a board and you know, to have all these responsibilities. I mean, that just shows how they went past maybe some prejudice they might have had or bias or whatever to see that you really wanted to do something for the community, which is cool.
That's why, and we can talk about this too, but that's why I really enjoyed running for Republican State Committee, because that was my first time. I mean, people knew me as...
I gotta say, that's fucking brave, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fucking brave.
People knew me as, like, the local Republican, and there was once a time where...
in this blue state, too. I mean, it's kind of intense.
There was a time where I had friends and colleagues, because when you're in a small town, everyone knows everyone. Even if you don't agree, you still know them.
Yeah.
On the Democratic town committee, and like there were times where my town committee was doing things that they're like, that's a little dubious, we don't know about that. So they would approach me first and they're like, look, Jordan, you're the only one we can talk to. Here's our problem, just so you know. And I'm like, I appreciate you telling me that, because I'm someone who's always tried to stay on good terms with people, because I think conversation is very important. Which is why I like what you're doing.
It sounds like you're like a liaison.
That's something that I've always resonated with. If there's anything I can do, it's at least tell you what's going on. So
here's the question, and it's really basic. Why are you Republican?
Oh God, this, I've gotten this question so many times.
I'm sorry to ask it, but
No. Honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with where I came from, being in that kind of community. I grew up in a family where charity was a huge thing. Since the earliest I could remember, we ran a charity foundation. And
was this religiously based?
It was not religiously based, although my family does have a relationship with religion. The charity was just a more communitarian based aspect, where if you are in the community, that's my foot, sorry. I'm scratching against the sofa. Sorry.
All these setups are very makeshift. This is like a Hamilton Beach box.
It's my favorite part, actually.
And so this is how it is.
So we had this charity organization. It was called Heart to Heart, and we did another aspect of it up until recently, where we did a poker run. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a bike run.
Yeah, sure.
So we took that and we added a poker aspect to it, where at each rest stop between sites, you would draw a card for your poker card.
That's
and then
hilarious.
When you got back to the main area, you would play your hand. Best hand won $100, worst hand won $50. All the money we raised would go to a family in need in the community. For the bike run, it would be families who couldn't afford medical bills because of cancer. In the original group, which was run by my grandfather, we would throw a kind of like a summer get-together on the town common. All the money we raised would go to families that couldn't pay their bills. Maybe they couldn't afford heating. I love that, because you are creating these events that are fun and creative, and then you're dealing with serious stuff on the backside. You know what I mean? It's something that I've always enjoyed doing, and it rubbed off on me. That and my family, they were business owners. And I got to experience from the other side, being the daughter of local business owners, what that looked like. What actually went into running a business in a place like Massachusetts. And thinking back on it... Are we talking about taxation and... we're talking about regulations, taxations, just having to... It's really intense. It is. You go to a local park here and there's like 10 rules. And as someone who's been in government, I understand that policies, regulations, they have a point, they have a place, they are intended for something. But as someone who has grown up in a family that has to contend with those regulations from that position, I can understand the heartbreak, the frustration, and just the general anger that comes with trying to follow the law. I think that's what kind of, and this is kind of a buzzword, but people who are elite, who are leftist and democratic, I think they don't understand that. They have higher degrees, they are professionals or whatever, and they've been given a lot. Whereas like people who come from a more working class background or business owners, I think they don't really understand each other. The more professionals or whatever, they don't understand that there's so many struggles there that are going on, and that's a common thing in America, that groups of people don't understand each other. But I'm going to say it as somebody who used to work with the left a lot, that I've come across that so much, is just this obtuse, almost willful ignorance from people on the left who are professionals, who just don't understand this sort of thing. And it creates enmity. It does. It creates it. I have friends on the left to this day who I consider myself to be very close with, who still can make me so mad, just because of our inability to see eye to eye on what I think should be very easy to. And I have to be the one to step back for a moment and be like, okay, how do I reapproach this? Or like, that's why I'm so impressed with that charity work you were doing, because it's
it's fun. Like that poker aspect is just.
Yeah, it was fun. It was very fun.
That's glorious, and you're actually doing real work for people who and that can be shameful, but it's like the whole community coming together to help some people. Yeah, that's real work. Whereas sometimes like the left, and I don't mean to totally dump on the left here, but I mean, I did a lot of activism on the left, and I saw a lot of people being do-gooders who would do things, but it was things that didn't really help.
Yeah.
A lot of money wasted, a lot of resources wasted. And sometimes if I would bring up stuff like, hey, this is not really helping people, I was sometimes drummed out.
Yeah.
But I was sometimes, the only person there who was actually poor, who had been homeless before, who knew that what they were doing was actually going to shame people, that sort of thing. So y'all, listen up. Listen up if you're, more leftist and you're thinking about helping people. You have to listen about what actually is going to help.
Yeah. Because it's not the same. I mean, you have to have different solutions. You have to treat people as individuals because we all have different experiences. Yeah. We talk a really big game about our lived experiences and why those should factor into policy. Right. And you know what? I think we're right. I think lived experiences should be listened to. We have to listen to them even when they're different than our own. Yeah. So I got it. I understand where you're coming from on this. Yeah. The other thing I would say that really influenced me, other than living in a small town, living in a family of business owners, the charity aspect,
about being Republican.
Yes. My stepdad...
Because we've gone on a lot of tangents, which I love.
Yes. My favorite thing. Okay. My dad also... he was a former auxiliary police sergeant for the city, and he is a instructor for the NRA. Oh, so I grew up in a family that didn't just have guns around, but a family that embodied gun safety. Yeah. So
I've taken some of those classes, I will tell you.
They're good.
And they're great. And I was actually required to take them so that I could go out in the field in Alaska. So I really appreciated being able to, see a very qualified instructor and get some instruction. And also I've taken reloading classes with the NRA, which was great. Yeah.
See, that's something that and in fairness, that's something that bothers me about the right sometimes, is because the right will talk a big game also, but then do things like be shoddy about gun safety. And I'm like, you can't talk about.
Can you think of specific instances? Because I'm sure people are like, oh no, that doesn't happen.
Oh God, there actually is one specific example, and I wish I could remember it, but it's on my Twitter because I specifically just remember calling out, I believe it was a member of Congress. I think it was someone from the Midwest, Boebert.
Oh, okay.
If I recall, Lisa Bo. If I recall, there was either an ad or a photo op she did where she just wasn't doing good gun safety. Oh, okay. And I'm just like, how can you
like her finger on the trigger?
That kind of thing. And I'm like, I can't.
Sweeping the room.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the thing. Like, if you're going to be about gun ownership, you have to be about gun safety too, because it's a weapon.
Especially if you're a public official and you're behind this sort of thing. Come on now.
Exactly.
You need to get your butt to a class.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. That's why I wish more people were.
What do you think about some of the lobbying of the NRA though? Because some people think it's kind of weak. They've kind of gone back on. Protecting rights. What do you think about that? It's kind of a hot button topic.
Honestly, I personally have mixed feelings about the NRA because I feel that when an organization usually gets that big, no matter the political affiliation, they tend to run astray of the mission. Yeah. They get bogged down in
it's a little bloated.
Yeah, it becomes bloated. Yeah. It's the same problem with large government, where if something becomes too big, you can't run it effectively, and it's no different for the NRA. Yeah. So I think that they have done some good work. Yeah. But at the same time, there have been times where I'm just like, you're not helping. Yeah. Defer it to states. Yeah. Because those state organizations know what's going on in their backyard better.
They can lobby better.
Exactly.
Yeah. The smaller ones can lobby better because they actually know the people. They know the interests in that community, and also, the NRA, if they really did focus more on training, the things that they do really good at, instead of lobbying, which they're getting a lot of feedback that they're not doing good lobbying, even from the right, even from gun owners, you know, they could be a much more effective organization, actually, I feel like. But yeah.
So I've never been a member of the NRA, but I
was very briefly.
I was very briefly a member of the Gun Owners Action League, which is a Massachusetts based organization. And those are the kind of things that I like.
Yeah.
I've also... I have hung out with some people who have been affiliated with the Pink Pistols.
Oh, yeah.
That's another organization I really like because they're very inclusive.
Yeah.
They're only interested in one thing, and that's safely using guns.
The current director, Erin Pallett.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know Erin, but
she's awesome.
I like the work that Pink Pistols do.
Yeah. She needs a little help, though. So if you are an ally or if you're an LGBT community of some sort, if you're related... you know, look her up and give her some help. Yeah.
Hey, I'm here for the plug.
Yeah.
I mean, trust me, speaking from someone who's now very involved in the nonprofit world, it's usually a game of we have all these things that need to be done and we have the same 4 people to do them.
Right.
And
that's always how it is. That's always how it is.
This makes me think back to something I said earlier about how it just hasn't been as accessible anymore to be political because the environment has made it so hostile to people who really they have some, let's just say, typical thoughts about politics. They're just interested in their local community and they want to get involved. This current climate makes it so hard for them to just do that because the only thing they're probably hearing are all the reasons not to get involved.
Right.
So,
and in some ways, your story is a cautionary tale in a way, you know, which is terrible because I mean, it's a school board seat.
Yeah.
Why does it have to come down to so much strife? You know,
I understand the frustration when you're talking about another person's children.
Yeah.
But the frustrating thing on my side is that I have to work with the framework that I'm given.
Yeah.
A lot of people wanted to do things that just fell outside of the authority of government. And
like what?
Well, just as I said earlier, school boards have 3 primary purposes: budget, hiring and firing, and policy. Yeah. And they wanted us to do things and respond to things that were just outside of there. And it's like, I empathize. I understand your frustration.
Was that because of COVID?
I think a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay.
COVID definitely set a precedent for people asking the question of, well, what can you actually do? And it's like, we can actually do everything it says we can do under the state constitution, like, and our bylaws. So, I mean, that's also been another thing too.
I'm just curious, what were people trying to push you guys to do?
So, depending on what time you're asking.
Sorry if that's sexist language, by the way.
No.
Well, I mean, what were they pushing you all to do?
I've been trying to use that more too. Yeah. Y'all is my favorite gender neutral term.
Or you. What were they trying to push you to do?
Or if my family, it's yins. But y'all yins trying to do.
Use guys.
So
I think that's a New Jersey one.
I guess it comes down to when in my term. Okay. My 2 terms, I should say, because at the first one, they were just trying to push us into doing things like, well, how can you make the schools continue to stay open? Can we create classrooms outside?
But that was like a state thing, wasn't it?
Like that was a state thing. Yeah. But some of the solutions that parents wanted us to do were a little bit outside of our purview. Like, can you open pop-up classrooms like in the parking lot and maybe have kids work outside? I'm like, no, we can't do that.
I'm going to tell you though, some places did do that,
and I'm sure it worked great. Yeah. But like
they extended connectivity to the parking lots because they were in very rural areas and people would come in anyway, and so being in a car was a contained space. Yeah. Whether that was a really good solution or not, I don't know. But yeah.
But that goes back to my personal philosophy on government, which is like, even if this is a good solution, if we just do it and we don't have a precedent to do it, that means what's stopping another board from doing something that people don't want to have done that's not in the bylaws because now we have precedent.
Yeah, I agree.
So I mean, that sometimes makes me a bit of a buzzkill, but like
and I agree with that, doing the minimum. It's like doing what your purview is. Yeah, not extending it out because, I mean, that could be abused.
That's why I like charity organizations like I do.
Yeah,
because as someone who understands how frustrating it can be, at least there are those in the community who can still step up. And I mean, that's probably why I'm so involved in charity, because it's like, I feel bad. I want to help. Here's how I can still do something.
And there's, I believe, at least up in Alaska, there was more interest. I mean, Alaska does have this anyway, and it has to do with geography, and it also has to do with politics, has to do with the libertarian strain up there. but there was a lot of homeschooling, and so support of homeschooling so that people could get through, and so the kids could get through and a standard curriculum at the very least, a framework of that, and then be able to get their high school or whatever certificate and move on. Did that also happen here, possibly?
I would say that we did have a big uptick in homeschooling.
Yeah.
As someone who had that knowledge in being on the board, I would say that homeschooling, oh God, it went from a handful of families pre-COVID to easily, I would say it's like 40, 50.
Okay.
So it's
did the school district support them, or did they have to get outside support?
Our school district did what it could.
Okay.
I mean, like there are mechanisms in place that do allow local districts to offer some resources and help the homeschooling families, because in the event that they ever want to come back, we have to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
Right.
So there is that degree of outreach available, but no, I would say the biggest thing I ran into was the second half of or my second term on the school board, where you had a lot of people who were mad about the current social issues, who wanted us to do things completely outside of our purview.
That was your CRT year.
Yeah, the CRT year. Yes. A lot of people wanting like
you should write a book on that.
I would love to, honestly, because I think it really is a cautionary tale.
Yeah, and it's such a unique situation. I mean, really. You know?
I did pitch a couple like big media publications about like, I want to talk about this because I was once upon a time these parents. Yeah. Like I resonate with their anger and their tactics. Right. Because the organizations that I used to be involved with employed some of those same tactics. Oh. And
what are these tactics that you're talking about?
So when I would say the aggressive approach to meetings, I would say the adoption of rallies across the town. There were a couple rallies where people would offer one thing and then like say a meat raffle, but then the actual purpose of the event would be to round up support and get signatures and get volunteers. And so like that kind of thing. And then the tactics. So it was
advertised as something else, but then there would be people with signatures.
Oh yeah, it's like, come for this meat rally, and then they have the banner of the organization trying to recall me.
Sure.
So and then my personal favorite was there was an event at the very start of 2022 where it was supposed to be come meet the candidates who will be running against all these awful people on the school board, and it headlined and had speaking slots for Jeff Deal and one of the Republican candidates running for governor, a candidate for Congress who was a Republican, Jeffrey Sosa Paquette. So I'm like, this is not a locally geared event anymore. No. You have made this into a statewide campaign event. Yeah. And your focus is that you want to drum support for the recall effort, which you announced at that event.
Wow.
Yeah.
With statewide resources too, and money and
bringing in the kind of like name recognition that comes with some of these candidates, because some of them
that's hardcore.
Yeah, some of them like Jeff Deal were sitting state reps at one point in time. So it's just like you're bringing in actual political resources now. So, I mean, that bothered me too. And that's the kind of thing that
sounds really effective. Were they effective
it was very
unseating
effective.
You?
They didn't unseat me, no.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't that effective.
I mean, it wasn't effective because they didn't want to acknowledge that the bylaws didn't allow for it. Okay. So the thing with our community is, with the board, I should say, is that the board is a regional board. So it's made up of, for us, it was 2 different communities in Central Mass. Okay. And each community was its own municipality with its own bylaws and town charters and all the fun stuff that goes into municipal government. You should probably find out what your town has and does if you're ever going to get involved with politics. But if you're a regional school board, you are not Town A or Town B, which for me would be Charlton and Dudley. You are not those. You are Dudley Charlton Regional School Board. That is your third municipality. Wow. You have your own bylaws, you have your own budget, you have your own employees. Sure, you elect people on the ballot in those 2 towns. Yeah. But those 2 towns are not you, and you are not those 2 towns. Okay. And a lot of people struggled with that. Yeah. So
I can see why.
It is confusing. I will admit that. But politics often is. Government's confusing. That's why I'm someone who wants to see it smaller.
Did they just not have enough resources to have 2 boards, or?
Oh no, it was just something back in the day where where I came from, a lot of small towns, it was just easier to kind of network together, combine. We have a lot of land, we have a lot of people, we don't have much else. So if we combine together, that gives us a world of opportunity. So since the 70s, my town has shared a district with this other town. And this combined district, as I said, had its own bylaws and rules and policies, and none of them allowed for a recall. But this created...
Was that something that people found out later?
Yes. And I think the issue is that it just never crossed anyone's mind. And there was never really something like this in the past.
Did you find out about that early? That they wouldn't have been able to be successful?
So I knew a little bit about it because... okay, I just realized I never really even finished my intro.
That's fine. It's fine.
But like, I knew a little bit about it because I've been
very
plugged
organic.
in. Of course, I'll get the other stuff. I'm on some nonprofits and activist organizations now, but
more.
For real. Earlier on, I used to be.
You must have quite a like robust constitution.
Yeah. I mean,
and you look really good. Like you're shiny and you look healthy. You must take good care of yourself.
I do not.
Okay,
the people in my life do for me.
Okay, all right. That nice young man I met earlier is okay. All right.
I have really good friends who make sure that I remember to do the basic things that I often forget. But,
all right.
So here you are. You have a town that has no mechanism for recall. You have a town that doesn't really have one and didn't really want to think about it. That was the other town.
Okay.
So what ended up being the case was Charlton, where I lived, I guess still live technically, and was serving from. We had a mechanism, but it didn't really apply to that. Our town clerk was like, well, this isn't really applicable. There is no way to recall that.
It's a small regional body, so it's not just one town's.
So they said that, and that organization did not like that. But the other community, Dudley, was like, please, because they ended up getting a lawyer who, for the record, is involved with the Federalist. Yeah, I know. At that point, I'm like, how are you going to say that you are not, like, coming at this from a particular angle when you're using resources that are associated with the Federalists? Anyway.
And that's, my understanding of them is they're very conservative, like far right.
Take it from me, someone who used to actually, like, preach their stuff back in another life. So you had the other town, which is like, well, now they got a lawyer. We don't want to deal with that. Just give them the paperwork so they can collect signatures. That sets a precedent when you're government. So you have one town that said, go ahead, go collect the signatures. And you have another town that's like, no, there's no mechanism.
That's a bit cowardly.
It is.
Yeah. That was a bad move.
It was, because it just muddles it more. So it was never going to happen.
I think that's terrible, because if that was a government official saying that they had an outlet for doing something, that seems like it would get whomever said that in trouble.
You would think. Unfortunately, it never got to that. Well, maybe fortunately, it never got to that point, because they would have to have collected, if I recall, because it ended up on Ballotpedia, they would have needed like 700 signatures to force a recall. They weren't even close.
Wow.
So, I mean, like, it never was going to happen. It was a very, very tight-knit group of individuals.
Just very loud.
Very loud, very passionate. And that doesn't equal an entire community. That just equals who shows up in the meeting. So that's how I survived a recall. But it was an eye-opening experience. My biggest concern, of course, was the students. Because I had to sit back and think throughout this whole thing, like, this looks awful. Like, for a lot of my people, my friends, and anyone who was watching on the outside, they're like, this looks really bad. They're coming after you. And I'm like, I know they're coming after me. They can't say that. But I am a target. But do you know who can see that they're coming after me for any number of reasons? All the LGBTQ youth in district, and their supporters, and their family, and their allies. So, like, it was not a good look.
And people of color. I mean, if they're going after CRT, you know what that means. I mean, that's... Of course. You know, we don't want to teach about slavery, it sounds like, and about racism, and I'm sure that all of that is glommed onto there.
Plus, the kind of people that ended up associating with their cause, I think, speaks volumes. And one of them actually is running for governor here in New Hampshire. Yeah, so I learned about this after the fact, but we had a large open forum when this first became an issue to try and explain things to the community.
I'm just going to interject for a second. So I talked to somebody a couple days ago in Keene who said she was a academic. She had gotten a PhD. You know, she's not a working academic though. That I think that was kind of her terminal.
Yeah.
You know, she wrote a dissertation and that's probably all it was. But she said that a lot of right-wing reactionaries come up here to New Hampshire.
I believe that.
Is that true?
I definitely believe that.
Okay.
A lot of people who were involved with the organizations that I was involved younger that were reactionary, a handful did come up here.
Yeah.
One of them even became a state rep, but he was fine.
We also have that problem in Alaska. So
I believe it.
People from the lower 48 or Hawaii or whatever, when they feel like they're being downtrodden for their bigoted beliefs,
I believe it.
They go up to Alaska. So we kind of have this collection of, you know, kind of scary people, even cultists too. They're like, we want to escape America, so we're going to Alaska, even though Alaska is part of America. But anyway,
I do want to clarify the one person who did move up here and actually became a state rep.
Yeah.
They were pretty cool.
Okay.
They were. Okay. I think they were wrapped up in the organization for the same reason that I was. Like they were someone who.
So they had that history, but they moved past it.
They liked Ron Paul.
Yeah.
They had their own ideas for small government, but it wasn't quite in the same vein that a lot of these organizations are now.
You know, it seems like it's hard to be a principled person in these movements now.
It feels like it.
Yeah.
Now, which is weird because for the longest time, everyone in these movements would scream about how they are the most principled people.
Right.
And that's why they're in this movement. And it's like, and I didn't see it. For the longest time, I did not see it.
Were you ignoring it or?
I don't know.
No, it just crept up on you?
Honestly, I think a huge thing that helped me was being challenged by people all the time.
Okay.
And I tried to apply some of that same challenge back to the people in my life during all of this because...
Who was challenging you?
Just...
Other LGBT people?
It wasn't even other LGBTQ people. It was...
Democrats?
Not Democrats.
Okay.
It was just new experiences.
Okay.
I was coming of age at a point where I was being... or I found myself in a position where I was fortunate to actually go out and do new things and have new experiences. And just kind of talking to people, listening to their stories, and doing the things that I would never find in those organizations because they act as an echo chamber, really forced me to reconsider my thoughts and why I believed what I did. At the very least, it forced me to step outside of myself and just kind of ask harder questions. And here's one.
Do you have any specifics about that?
I do. When I was younger, I was a huge fan of Ron Paul, and one thing that I constantly overlooked was his newsletters.
Yeah.
Because I knew about them.
Which were written by a notorious racist.
It's true. It's true. Someone who I'm pretty sure the Mises Caucus you brought up earlier really loves that person.
Yeah, they love him. Oh, yeah.
So... I don't remember this. It's so weird, but I ended up finding in my password to an old social media account that I had. I used to be a huge Ron Paul defender on Tumblr back when it was a relevant website. And I wrote like a lengthy multi-paragraph like post about why the newsletters were an elaborate ruse just to force Ron Paul to lose support.
Him?
Yeah, to discredit him, force him to lose support. Wow. And I was reading over it like years later because I got my access back to the account and I'm like, who is this person? I don't recognize this person. And
that's interesting.
I only broke out of that because I had people in my life who cared enough to keep challenging me on some of these these notions I had about like, well,
did you also hold some anger in you? Like you're talking, like I'm probably just projecting on these people, but they sound like the people who were opposing you were very angry, right?
Yeah, they're very angry.
And from my point of view, even if it's left or right, some people who are on the extreme ends, and I'm not talking about Democrats, they are not extreme. You know, people who are on the extreme ends, people who would use violence against people, for instance, they often come from a place of anger, of hating other people, you know. And it's non-consensual, and they just want to do whatever they want to do, and, you know, you have no rights. Were you coming from some sort of, like, anger like that?
I wasn't. And I sometimes wonder if, because I didn't come from a place of anger, I came from a place where I actually believed in the message of charity and like, without a voluntary. I believed that.
Yeah.
I came more from a place of I want a strong community where everyone can be their best selves.
Yeah.
So that might be why I was able to step back out and be like, this is not my movement. This is way not. This is angry. It was very angry.
Yeah.
Even the organizations that I was involved with were angry.
Yeah.
I was never that angry.
Yeah.
And that might be the reason why.
Yeah. And I've noticed that a lot of those spaces, at least online, like Liberty Movement, whatever, it's mostly men. I mean, it's pretty dominantly men. Women come in and they are often, harassed, like in the most vicious ways. And then they leave. And I wonder to myself, oh, is this liberty? Is this really what we want to make of the world? And I just wonder what some of those people are thinking.
Yeah, I've encountered so many different types of people in the liberty movement that...
Why do they even call themselves the liberty movement? It's not honest.
It's like CRT almost, in that liberty once meant something.
Yeah.
And it really depends on which corner of the internet you ask now.
Yeah.
Everyone owns liberty, and everyone has defined it.
Yeah.
And... I mean, we're no exception. I certainly have used liberty-minded language when I have been doing trans advocacy in DC, because I wanted to reach Republicans, because I understood. I
so
knew
those
how
were
they,
like buzzwords that you
yes, I use them as buzzwords. I'll admit,
to communicate,
but they were buzzwords that I understood. They understood.
Yeah,
I feel like where we are now is kind of, and maybe I helped contribute to that by playing into that game, but like. This is what happens when you only allow yourself to communicate in buzzwords.
Yeah.
It just, it reaches a point where things start to fall apart. So, but no, I was never quite angry, but there absolutely was anger. Yeah. And I think that was the thing that I saw the most in a lot of these parents who came to our school committee meetings, was that familiar anger that I recognized from my peers working in liberty organizations years ago. Yeah. Because that's the one thing we kind of resonated with was that you have a group of people, a group of power hungry people who don't understand the reality and the day-to-day needs of the average typical person, and they don't represent you. They're an active threat to your happiness and your way of life, and you have to get rid of them. And that same kind of approach was what we used back in the day, and that same kind of approach was what I received as a member of the school committee. So like while this was all happening, I could not help but feel a slight tinge of just like deja vu, except now I understood that what I was doing was...
It comes from like this sort of scarcity model too, as if, there's only so much to go around and we need to keep what we have and, not be generous and it's awful.